Live from SEMA 2019. It's the first episode of Fuel Cult from SEMA, and we got Joe Cariotti, my trusty co-host here. And then our guest this morning is Stephan Papadakis, Papadakis Racing.
Yo, good morning.
Good morning. You guys are in Gardena, right?
Yeah, city of Carson.
Oh, you're in Carson. Okay.
Yep.
Are you near Mountoon or?
We're like right around the corner, 5 minutes from those guys.
Okay, yeah. So I'm right out of Redondo, right off Torrance Boulevard. So yeah.
I live in Redondo.
Oh, you do?
So we're all local down in South Bay.
Oh, yes, we are. Well, except for Joe. Joe's out of Detroit.
Yeah, somebody's got to rep that coast with all the lakes.
He likes to call it a coast, even though they're just, lakes.
Well, they're inland lakes. They're huge.
Well,
they're great,
if
you will. Anyway, let's talk about what you're doing here. Your media team gave us a nice little flyer here, and has some interesting stuff on it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been watching your stuff for years, and I know a lot of the work that you've done, through Rich Wadis and everything, collaborations you've done with Magnaflow and stuff like that. But what's really caught me as of late is your series on tearing down the. It's not an S55 in the Supra, is it?
It's the B58.
B58, very closely related, right?
My understanding is the next evolution of it.
Yeah.
So they kind of start with a list of things that they want to make better, and then come out with the new platform,
okay,
the new engine.
So you've been around the racing scene forever. I'm sure you've worked on just countless 2Js at this point. What's the impression so far of the B58?
I like the engine a lot. Very elegantly designed to where aluminum block, aluminum head. You can see where they spend a lot of time getting a lot of the weight out of the block, but it's still quite stiff.
Yeah.
They do a closed deck, which if you want to make a lot of power, one of the things you got to watch out for is the cylinders cracking.
Yeah.
And a lot of the modern engines use what they like an open deck, so it's like a floating sleeve in there.
Yeah, and then Subarus are kind of halfway in between these days, aren't they?
Yep, most engines use some sort of weaker cylinder liner setup, which it's fine if you're trying to make 6, 7, even 800 horsepower. But once you're trying to make 1,000 or more, you can tripling the power of what they were designed for.
Well, there's a reason everybody goes to a 2J or an LS.
Yep. So the 2J, very much like a truck engine, built really solid, built to last for years. They've never really had a really good flowing cylinder head. So you'll see a lot of boost.
More boost in.
Yeah, and it works, and they take it, and that's why you see them so successfully on the drag racing scene, because they can boost the heck out of them and make tons of power.
Is it limited on the intake, or is it limited on the exhaust side?
It could be both, and also potentially with the cams as well, because it's a direct cam over bucket.
Okay.
So you get limited on when you make the lobe larger, it'll start hanging off the end of the bucket.
Yeah.
And you can go to like larger buckets and
does it just start throwing off the angle and everything in there too, or?
Yeah, so there's just sort of limits on the amount of lift and duration you can get with cam over bucket versus a rocker arm setup. So there's no rocker arm ratio.
Right.
So you hear about rocker arm ratios 1.6 or 1.7 to 1. It's direct acting on the 2JZ.
Okay, very cool. What do you got for him, Joe?
Well, just kind of looking over things here. You guys are talking very technical, and I appreciate that. But so for the lay person here, what do you have going on here? I see the flyer. It says 1,000 engine horsepower, and we have, nice picture. And our audio listeners aren't going to get this, but a nice picture of you with your hands folded like a, race car driver kind of thing. Getting 1,000 horsepower out of this thing, it sounds like you know what you're doing. When you saw the engine, were you instantly like, okay, we're going to 1,000? So
I'll give you a little bit of history on what our roots in racing were in the front wheel drive drag racing. We ran 4-cylinder turbocharged engines, and we're kind of always like blazing this trail among other people.
Were you guys like the first into the 9s with a normally aspirated Civic?
We ran turbocharged cars, but we're first into the 9s and the 8s.
Okay.
We broke 150, 160, 170, 180 mile an hour front wheel drive. So a lot of stuff back then. We moved to drift around 2005, 2006.
Yeah.
And the cars were relatively simple back then. But now they're quite sophisticated, where 1,000 horsepower is pretty much, par out there, but they're endurance engines where they need to last for weekends at a time, and so it's not just drag racing where you do a couple of pulls and hopefully it lasts. It's got to go the whole weekend and a lot of time multiple events. And we really had a lot of fun, like just personally, and other guys at the shop as well. We like developing things that people haven't developed before. That's what's fun. And it's not necessarily getting us stuff out of the catalog. So when this 2020 Supra came out, we thought there was a fun opportunity to get one of these cars, get one of the engines, and try to make 1,000 horsepower. which they come with 335, I believe. If I remember
which
correctly.
seems like it's probably a little under. I mean, I'm sure it's SAE rated, but I'm sure it probably feels like a hell of a lot more than that.
Yep, and with bolt-ons and retunes, a lot of the guys with these Supras are already making over 600.
Yeah.
So we thought, all right, well, let's try to make 1,000. We'll see what we can develop as far as the engine mechanical side. But in doing that, we really wanted to share that process, where a lot of racing teams and competition teams like to hide that because that's their that's
People like to think they've got secret sauce.
yeah, and a lot of them do, right? But we said, you know what? Let's be offensive here instead of defensive. Let's worry about let's just share this fun project, share the flow. And so we've built several videos. One where we take apart the B58 engine and we talk about the pros and cons of it, and then another one with all of the parts that we're going to change, and the third one where we reassemble the engine with all of the updates. And the one we're working on right now, which is trying to make 1,000 horsepower on the engine dyno. So once we get all that worked out, then we're going to share that fourth video, and then it kind of leads into, well, now what are we going to do with the engine?
Are you hanging out with Randy and the Cell at Mountoon? Is that what you're doing, using their engine dyno? I thought I saw a clip of that or something.
So we are using Mountoon's dyno, and because they're only a couple minutes away, and they have a 1,500 horsepower
they've got a really
dyno.
nice cell for that. A really nice one. I remember when they put that up.
Yep. So if any listeners kind of losing track here, like you can dyno the engines in a car on a chassis dyno where it's actually turning the tires and it's reading what it is putting down to the ground. Or what we're doing is we're removing the car from the equation, and the engine actually bolts up to a power absorption unit. And it's a very sophisticated system to where you can run the engine at different loads and different RPMs, and it reads the direct horsepower from the engine. And you take all of the complexities away from like the transmission and the drivetrain losses and all of the factory computer systems that can sometimes limit you on the power that you can make. And we're just working on trying to make the engine make the power that we're trying to get to, which is the 1,000. And then we work on the car systems later when we try to integrate that into the vehicle.
I was going to ask about the systems, the computer systems. How tough is that to work in? Obviously, you started in the 1990s. It was a lot more mechanical then. What's the big hassle right now getting to that 1,000 horsepower mark and making it reliable with the computer side of things?
So one of the big challenges is reprogramming the factory computer. And there are some systems that allow you to reflash them, but they're very limited on how deep you can go into the software. And it's a bit of a black art there.
Plus, is that ECU set up and that platform like fully developed at this point with the aftermarket? Because like you get the Dining guys and Weistech and those guys that'll crack it, on the older ones, they're well-trodden territory. But this B58's relatively new, isn't it?
Yep. So we're actually not using any of the factory control system. We're using a standalone AEM Infinity system, and we're actually not using the direct injection either, because again, there's some limitations on. So there's a couple things that add up here. Number one, we're using E85 fuel instead of gasoline, and it has a higher knock. It's less susceptible to knock, but it takes more fuel to make the same power, so we need more fuel flow.
Well, you need, 30-40% more flow for an E85 setup, right?
That's right. So we need additional flow for the power that we want, plus the fuel we're using needs additional flow. And the way direct injection works is injecting fuel directly into the combustion chamber, and there's only a short period of time where it can do that during after the intake stroke. Mm-hmm. And when you're trying to inject that much fuel into such a short period of time, there are limitations. You need a bunch of fuel pressure. They run into 5,000 or more psi fuel pressure.
I'm assuming that's probably a mechanical pump on the block somewhere.
That's right. And if you want to do what we're doing, where you're trying to make so much power, sometimes you need dual mechanical pumps or a whole separate pump that's like engine driven off of like a serpentine belt or something. So instead of dealing with all of that complexity, we've actually just designed an intake manifold that we can put 6 traditional port injectors.
Okay, that was going to be my next question.
So our philosophy is when you're trying to develop an engine that you haven't worked on before, the mechanical end of it, we want to remove the most amount of variables. So we're putting a known computer system, a known fuel injector, a known fuel pump, things like that. Work on making sure that the block, rods, pistons, head gasket, all of those things are robust enough to handle the power. And then once we design the mechanical side of it, Then we go back and try to integrate that into the factory systems or, the retuned system.
Yeah, I guess it'll be a big question on whether or not you've got the flexibility with that factory ECU to actually get injector duty up and maybe run some auxiliary injectors and things like that, because I'm thinking that on that car, probably not a lot of options in terms of higher flow injectors for the factory.
Right. I don't believe there's any today, but there's a huge demand for it. And there's a lot of smart people out there in the aftermarket that are going to figure it out.
Oh, this car, I mean, this will get it. I mean, it's the same problem that like the GM ran into when they launched the LT1 a few years back. It was just there was no support, so everybody just went LS3 because it was all port injection. And quite frankly, I kind of like that a little better anyway. It's easier to manage. But do you see, I mean, kind of going forward with your stuff, do you anticipate direct injection getting ironed out sometime in the next 3-4 years here? Or, where it's viable to use that as your primary fueling system? Or do you think you're going to be stuck with port injection for some time?
It's a good question. I think the DI stuff, the direct injection, will get worked out. It's definitely a better system.
Yeah.
You can make more power. There's less knock. There's just a bunch of positives out of direct injection. The aftermarket is just catching up, though. And, similar to, the 80s and the 90s when, everybody was on carburetors and then it was switch over to fuel injection. It took a while before the aftermarket was able to get something reliable and that the consumer or even teams could, without a team of engineers, be able to apply.
I kind of liken it to when we switched over ignition standards too in the early mid 90s, where it's just we went from distributors and everything and everybody was like, I don't know what the hell to do with this new electronic ignition stuff.
So we run electronic ignition on everything to where it's a coil directly on the spark plug, and there's no spark plug wires anymore, and everything's controlled by the ECU, and it's just so much of a better system with less failure points.
Can you get away with using the factory setup for the ignition, or are you changing that out as well?
We use the factory coils.
Okay, cool.
So we are using those, and then we need to add an igniter. It's very simple. So it's the ECU. It sends out a signal. It goes to this little igniter box, and then it triggers the stock ignition coil. And it's very simple and good.
So I could talk engine architecture all day with you. And given that you live real close to us, we'll probably follow up with this again in the future at some point. But, while we're here, you guys are obviously here promoting some stuff. I'm imagining the YouTube series is probably doing very well to be honest, for a brand new series coming out, the quality is fantastic. Most shops are just slapping together crap. You guys are doing a really high production value, and I appreciate that. Especially coming from the world where all of my friends built drive and everything. I've seen the effort that goes into that, so I really appreciate what you guys are doing there. What else are you guys trying to promote while you're here?
We are, I don't know if promote's the right word. I guess we just want to share the project that we have going on. So traditionally in motorsport, you try to build a car and have it as competitive as possible. Then you bring it out to the event and you try to win and, update that and try to, continue to win events and win the championship. And hopefully, sponsors and exposure and stuff happens through that sort of organically from those successes. We are definitely doing that. But in addition to that, we wanted to share the whole process of how we build an engine in the future, how do we build these race cars, and just try to get people, inspired for their own projects. Mm-hmm. And this week here at SEMA, we have the 2020 Supra engine, the B58, which we've already had on the dyno for a few days. We've then taken it back apart to look at it and make sure everything's good. And then we're going to reassemble it here at the show Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday from 1 p.m. to 3:30 at the Toyota booth. Mm-hmm. So we're actually working with Toyota here at the show.
A little factory backing never hurts.
Yeah, it's great. So we have a platform, and so people can walk up, ask questions. I'll be live building the engine. In addition to that, we are going to stream that live on the Papadakis Racing YouTube channel. So even if you're not at the show, you can watch it as well, and you can actually interact and ask some questions through the forum there on the YouTube interface. Mm-hmm. And I'll probably have Jen over here ask me some questions at different, relays those questions over, and we'll answer those questions. So it could be anything from about the engine specifically, or probably more broadly, some of my philosophies on building the engine and the techniques and the tools that we use. Cool.
So as far as the tools and stuff go, I noticed, it's a German car, so lots of torques. What's your take on doing that now? Is this your first really in-depth project with a German engine, or?
It is, yeah. And it was, the Torx at first. So it's not a normal like hex bolts. It has the Torx style. And at first I was like, and we have all the tools. I was like, I'm not sure if I like this, but I don't see any downside, and they all have smaller heads, so I'm actually okay with it when I use it.
I've come to love it.
Yeah.
I bought a Macan last year, and everything on that, of course, is Torx because VW Auto Group. God damn, that's just so much. It doesn't slip. You're not rounding stuff off. I just come to absolutely love that. I wish everything was built that way now.
Yep. So those have been okay. There's a lot of special tools for like the valve train.
I saw that. Yeah.
The engine itself, there's no top dead center marks. There's nowhere you line it up on top of the center. Yeah. So you have to insert a pin into the flex plate where the torque converter bolts up, and then that'll lock you into 0 on the crank. And there's a whole other fixture that you install on the cam train to lock the cams in 0. So it's some interesting stuff like that. Well, there was something else. A lot of the hardware. So the cylinder head bolts, the main cap bolts are all torque to yield bolts.
Okay.
What torque to yield means is you'll torque to some low number, maybe it's 15 foot-pounds or 30 foot-pounds, and then you add certain amounts of degrees. And once you torque it, and then it's good to go. But when you remove the bolt, and let's say you remove the cylinder head, and now you want to put it back on, you need to replace all of the hardware, because during that torquing procedure, you've yielded the bolt, and you've stretched it beyond the point to where it will be elastic and move back to its normal length.
Yeah.
You've brought it to the plastic, and it won't return.
That's a lot of engines these days, but I mean, it's
Yeah.
nice because it keeps it. You don't have bolts backing out. Long story short.
So, but we were replacing a few of those bolts with more traditional. So we worked with ARP, and or if you know that I like this bolt, you just have to have a lot on hand. So every time you replace it, you put the fresh bolts in it.
Only $12 from BMW every time you need one.
That's the thing, right? Is that's where the aftermarket has a lot of opportunity here on cars like this. Is for the same price as the replacement bolt from the dealer, they can sell a multi-use hardware from ARP or whoever.
Okay, so off of the engine into the remainder of the drivetrain here. So let's start at the transmission. ZF8 speed, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
We pulled it out and set it aside. We actually haven't spent much time on the transmission.
Okay. I'm curious. I mean, we've seen that transmission's obviously been used in a lot of stuff. Have you gotten any indication into how heavy duty the spec was on that car, and if you think you're going to end up having to do some major work on that as well to hold the power?
My understanding from the guys that are using it is that has not been a limiter. The mechanical side of the transmission, it is quite robust. It's the control systems and making sure that they can get the computer to not freak out when they're putting, double the horsepower through it. So there are some torque limiting sort of safeties within the system, and I don't know if it's on the transmission or the engine side. So it's just working through those, reprogramming the computer, and then I mean, there's guys running 10-second quarter miles with slicks with that factory transmission, and I have yet to hear of anybody having an actual failure or anything like that.
I think the Hellcat runs a variant to the ZF8 speed as well.
Yeah, look, if
that pig can hold it.
and that's right, and you're talking about a transmission that hasn't been pulled apart yet. I'm sure if they find some failure or weak point, the aftermarket will go and replace it. And that's the same with the Nissan GTRs, right? And they were good to some point, and then they weren't, and then the aftermarket came in and fixed and solved some issues there, and then now they're, very robust.
If it just wasn't so damn clunky as far as a dual clutch goes, I'd love that car.
So there's a bit of a debate, right? Because some people like the dual clutch and wish maybe the Supra came with that, but then I drove the Supra and I kind of like the automaticness of it.
Yeah.
But when you go and you switch it into sport mode, it actually shifts quite hard and quite quick to where you kind of forget that it's a traditional
line
automatic.
Pressure and just start slamming gears.
I guess I don't know. I'm not much of a transmission guy, but I didn't see it being an issue.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it'd be interesting to see where it goes. So are you guys actually looking to get into the parts business for the Supra? Is that what the goal of this build ultimately is going to be? Or
so no, we're in the racing team business. We're in the call it marketing business.
Yeah.
Working with our sponsors. We just are sharing the projects that we're doing and working with the aftermarket companies to help develop some of the components. So if they, we work with JE Pistons for the pistons and Carrillo with the rods and Supertech with the valve train and ARP with some of the hardware. And the deal we have with them is, look, we want to design. We need components to be able to make this power. Can you work with us and share some of your R&D? And then in return, you guys, have us helping with the R&D, right? The research and development. But we don't want to sell any of that. They let them do that.
I have to ask because the series is kind of queued up in such a way that I'm like, looks like they might actually put out some really cool shit. But if you guys are just doing it as a learning experience and working with these other guys, that's really cool too. I mean, it's frankly kind of generous to the community to show this stuff off. Usually, most people that do stuff like this are end up like, we're selling intake manifolds or whatever now.
That's not our core business, and we like to really stick with our core business, which is the competition, and now beyond that is production of some of these videos.
Very cool. So on the Supra, have you actually spent much time driving it yet, or?
Very little. We got our car and then drove it around the block a couple of times and then realized, okay, this is, for us, one of one. Like, if something happens, like this whole, there's just too much riding on it. I'm like, okay, let's just bring it in. We didn't even do a burnout.
You mean you're not just like throwing around $60K to buy cars every day?
No. So, we didn't beat up on it very much. I got a sense of the feel of it, but the real goal is trying to make get the engine out, make the power, and then go from there. We're definitely going to spend a lot of time in the car in the future, but we're not to that phase yet.
I was going to say, do you have any all the engineering and R&D that's going into this build and your media production? You seem very busy. Do you ever actually have time to enjoy what you're building here? When do you get to just play with the stuff?
So for me, playing and enjoying is the development. So I'll be at the shop, I'll look at a component, we'll say, okay, we need a solution here. So just bring out the pencil and the pad of paper and start, what are we trying to achieve? What are we working with? What do we need to design? And then that whole process of, and then maybe we're designing something and building something in-house. It could be something we're fabricating or machining, or maybe we're working with another company like JE and then dealing with them on the piston side and they're deciding what rings to use. That whole process is the enjoyable part for me. And then at the end is trying to making sure that everything worked, right?
So and this is what I'm really getting in this interview here, is the sense of your passion for the engineering side of things. And is that what got you started in all of this? Was you just wanted to engineer something great, or was it the car side that got you into this whole industry?
Yep. So I really liked to race, and I wanted to be a race car driver, which I was for many years. And we were building cars that people hadn't really built before, so we had to also engineer them and figure out. So I was kind of dual purpose at that point with the old drag racing cars and even some of the drifting. And then after a while, when we switched to drifting, I wanted to be, I tried to be a pro drift driver and realized that I wasn't as good as some of the top level drivers.
So in other words, you hung out with Tanner for an afternoon and you were like, fuck.
But what I learned was, look, he's a better driver than me, but I've got a skill with designing and handling logistics for the team and all of that. And together, we're much more powerful than any one of us on our own. And that was sort of my aha moment. Like, I think I found my calling and what I really enjoy doing, which is building the cars.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I did. The only reason I said that is because I had that moment with Tanner where I'm just like, oh, I'm not ever going to hit this. No.
And that's, and that's the thing. When you meet and you have an opportunity to work with some of these true racing drivers, they see things differently and feel things differently, I think, than the common man. And that's what gives them the ability to reach those really high levels.
Yeah, well, you talk to those guys, they're like, the V8 supercar guys are wild out of Australia, too. Or, all the Formula D guys, Tony Angelo and people like that.
Are you going to get any BMWs in? You think you're going to, I know you're doing a lot of Toyota factory stuff, and we want to promote that, but do you see a time down the line where you might say, let's go play with that Z4 a little bit?
No, we're committed to the 2020 Supra at this point. This is the engine that came in it, and that's the reason why we're working on this particular engine. If there's another new Toyota vehicle in the future, that might be something we would look at. But we're not looking to expand it beyond the Supra at the moment.
Well, it sounds like you have a really good thing going. I'm excited to check out some of those videos. Where can the people find you?
Yep. So you can go to our YouTube page, Papadakis Racing, And if you just search for like Supra B58 engine teardown or just Supra 2020 teardown, you probably will show up in the Google search results. Instagram is Steph Papadakis, STEPH Papadakis. On Instagram.
Easy to spell.
Yeah, I know.
No problem.
Well, yeah, it's that's the thing with Greek names, though. Phonetic. It's easy. It's exactly like it sounds.
Yeah. So if you look for enough Supra stuff, you'll probably find us.
I was going to say, if you just search any Supra stuff, 1,000 horsepower Supra, things like that, man, really cool. I'm going to try to sneak out from here and check out what you have going on at 1 o'clock over there. So.
Yep. So Wednesday, Thursday, Friday from 1 p.m. to 3:30 at the Toyota booth.
Okay. Well, this will be going out tonight, so we'll hopefully get you a little contribute to that crowd a little bit. We'll see how that goes. But Stephan, thank you so much for coming by, and thank you for the patience this morning. We had some issues setting up. It's been a little crazy here at SEMA, but this is the way it always goes on the first day. There's always a few messes to clean up.
Thanks for helping us do R&D on our audio setup.
Yeah, no problem, guys.
And this is a wrap on the first episode from SEMA. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And if you want to check us out, go to fuelcult.com, and there'll be more content up after we get back from SEMA. Otherwise, thanks to Magnaflow for hosting us once again from their wonderful podcast stage. Go to magnaflow.com, and you can go buy all kinds of lovely sounding exhaust systems. And this is Chris Hayes and Joe Cariotti signing off.